Hey there. Tonight I'll tell you some stories about the Silk Road. Make sure your volume is just right. And I wish you a peaceful sleep. The mystery of the ancient kingdom of Lulan and the explorer's fatal journey. When I was a child, I often heard tales about Lulan. In my imagination, it was a magnificent ancient kingdom in the western regions, with grand palaces, bustling city streets filled with laughter, and melodies dancing through the air. The women of Lulan were said to be graceful singers and dancers, their exotic charm captivating all who beheld them. But what fascinated me most about this ancient land was the veil of mystery that surrounded it. When I was a child, I often heard enchanting tales about Lulan. In my imagination, it was a splendid and ancient kingdom in the western regions, adorned with majestic palaces, vibrant city streets echoing with laughter, and the melodies of songs and dances floating through the air. The women of Lulan were said to be gifted singers and dancers, their exotic grace captivating the hearts of all who beheld them. But what fascinated me most about Lulan was the aura of mystery that surrounded it. Nicknamed the Pompeii in the Sands, Lulan was once a flourishing ancient nation, now buried under golden dunes for thousands of years. What caused such a prosperous kingdom to vanish so suddenly? Once a vital hub on the Silk Road, Lulan left behind many mysterious marks in the cultural and historical records of China. Yet, despite its past glory, it disappeared without leaving a single detailed description in the official chronicles, a silence that has stirred countless questions through the centuries. What could have caused such a thriving civilization to vanish without a trace? Lulan in historical records. According to surviving historical accounts, the people of Lulan established their kingdom in the 3rd century BCE. At the time, the region was under the rule of the Yuezhi people. From 177 to 176 BCE, the Xiongnu defeated the Yuezhi, and Lulan came under Xiongnu control. The earliest mention of Lulan in Chinese history appears in the records of the Grand Historian by Sima Qian, a renowned historian of the Western Han dynasty. In the Book of Han, biography of the Xiongnu, it is recorded that the Xiongnu chieftain, Modu Chanyu, wrote a letter to Emperor Wen of Han, boasting of his military conquests. He declared, Lulan, Wusun, Huyen, and 26 neighboring states have all fallen under Xiongnu rule. It was then that the Han court first learned of Lulan's existence. But where exactly was this mysterious kingdom? It wasn't until the diplomat Zhang Qian's mission to the western regions that Lulan's location was more clearly understood. In the Book of Han, accounts of the western regions, it is written, 1,600 li west of Yang Pass, and 6,100 li from Chang'an. Due to its extremely strategic geographic location, Lulan was a vital crossroads of the ancient Silk Road. To the southwest, it connected with Shul, Jingjue, Khotan, and Yutian. To the north, it bordered Shanshan. To the northwest, it linked with Yanqi, and to the east, it faced the White Dragon Mounds and had access to Dunhuang. This made Lulan a key transit point for trade between east and west, and a constant target in the power struggle between the Han dynasty and the Xiongnu. Caught between two great powers, the people of Lulan found themselves in a perilous position. As the saying went, if Lulan belongs to neither, there will never be peace. In 77 BCE, the kingdom of Lulan changed its name to Shanshan and officially submitted to the Han court. According to the records of the Grand Historian, during the Western Han period, Lulan had over 14,000 inhabitants and nearly 3,000 soldiers. Though the ancient kingdom of Lulan once thrived in great prosperity, it mysteriously and abruptly vanished in the year 630 CE, leaving behind only whispers of its glory, and a desert full of unanswered questions. The Swedish explorer Sven Hedin, as time passed, the ancient kingdom of Lulan once again drew the world's attention. In the year 1900, it was rediscovered by the famed Swedish explorer, Sven Anders Hedin. Sven Hedin was not only an explorer, but also a geographer, topographer, photographer, travel writer, and illustrator. He even created his own drawings to accompany his writings, showcasing his considerable artistic talent. Though born into a middle-class family, his extraordinary achievements earned him the rare honor of being named a non-hereditary noble in Sweden. Today, he is remembered as one of the most influential figures in Swedish history. Hedin's greatest accomplishments came through 4 major expeditions across Central Asia, a region to which he seemed spiritually bound. His experiences were so exceptional, they've become legend. So allow us to share a part of his remarkable story. Born in 1865, Hedin grew up during an era of intense maritime exploration and was deeply inspired by the great European explorers of the time. By the age of 15, he had already made up his mind to become one of them. He studied under the renowned German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen, a pioneer in the geological study of China. You may not have heard of Richthofen himself, but you've surely heard of the phrase he coined, the Silk Road. Under Richthofen's mentorship, Hedin became determined to uncover the uncharted mysteries of Asia. In 1893, Hedin embarked on his first expedition to China, a grueling journey that would last 4 years and come to be known as the Death March. But why such a grim name? Let's take a closer look. Hedin arrived in Kashgar, Xinjiang, in May 1894. After 8 or 9 months of careful preparation, he and his caravan set out toward the deadly Taklamakan Desert. When they passed through a Uyghur village, the entire village gathered to watch in curiosity. "Where are they going?" someone asked. Upon learning that they were headed into the Taklamakan, an elderly man shook his head and shouted, "They will never return." In the Uyghur language, Taklamakan means enter and you will not come back. And true to the old man's warning, what Hedin and his team endured nearly cost them their lives. They became lost in a maze of dunes. Both men and camels grew weaker by the day. Their water ran out. But the worst was yet to come. A monstrous sandstorm, the likes of which none had ever seen, descended upon them, threatening to bury them alive. One by one, members of the expedition succumbed. Only Hedin and a few of his assistants remained, struggling on the edge of death. At one point, Hedin felt he could go no further. He abandoned nearly all his belongings and changed into a clean outfit, hoping to meet death with some dignity, but fate had other plans. Miraculously, he stumbled upon a water hole. With nothing left to carry it, he took off his leather boots, filled them with water, and carried them back to his assistant. Those boots, and the precious water inside, saved their lives. Years later, after returning to Sweden, Hedin wrote an annual letter of thanks to the shoemaker who had crafted those boots, always including enough money for another pair. Today, that very pair of boots is on display in the Hedin Memorial Museum. The discovery of the ancient city of Lulan, despite his near-death experience, Hedin's passion for exploring China never faded. In January 1899, supported by the King of Sweden, he returned to Xinjiang with a bold mission, to map the Darim River and locate the exact site of Lopner, the mysterious disappearing lake. In March 1900, the expedition moved into the Lopner Desert, following the dry left bank of the Kongke, Peacock, River. There, they stumbled upon the ruins of several wooden structures, ancient Chinese coins, iron tools, and beautifully carved wooden ornaments near the old riverbed. These discoveries electrified Hedin. Though eager to explore further, he faced a brutal reality. Their water reserves were almost gone. Fearing a repeat of his earlier ordeal, he made the hard decision to turn back, cutting short what might have been an even greater archaeological breakthrough. Let me know if you'd like the next part translated, or if you'd like help creating scene-by-scene visuals, subtitles, or a narration script for YouTube or documentary purposes. However, not long after they had set off, the group suddenly realized that they had forgotten their only shovel back in the wooden hut. In the unforgiving desert, such a tool could be the difference between life and death. Haydine's guide, Aldec, volunteered to return at once and retrieve it, but as time passed, the team waited and waited. And Aldec never returned that night. By the following evening, just as anxiety and dread began to grow, Aldec finally reappeared, and not just with the missing shovel, but with a groundbreaking discovery. As it turned out, Aldec had been caught in a violent sandstorm right after finding the shovel. Disoriented by the storm, he lost his way, and accidentally wandered into a mysterious ruin. There, buried beneath layers of wind-blown sand, stood the remnants of an ancient city, long fortress walls, wide streets, clusters of buildings, and Buddhist stupas. Scattered on the ground, Aldec also found ancient coins and carved wooden tablets. When Haydeen examined the wooden tablet, he was instantly captivated by its exquisitely detailed floral patterns, unlike anything he had ever seen. With his seasoned eye, he knew immediately, this site was of immense archaeological significance, yet at that moment, they still had no water, and their firewood was running low. Reluctantly, Haydeen made the hard decision to withdraw, vowing to return another time to uncover the secrets of the site. In March 1901, well-prepared and determined, Haydeen returned to Xinjiang and retraced his path to the ancient ruins. The city had been built along a riverbank but was now nearly swallowed by drifting sands. After a week of excavation, the team unearthed wool and silk fabrics, animal bones, earrings, ceramic shards, human hair, boots, and pieces of household furniture. Inside a ruined Buddhist temple, they discovered a 1.15-meter tall statue of the Buddha, along with intricately carved wooden artworks. But the most extraordinary finds were literary: 36 paper manuscripts written in Chinese, and 120 bamboo slips. Haydeen brought all of these relics back to Sweden. After careful study, it was confirmed, this forgotten ruin was none other than the capital of the ancient kingdom of Lulan. Buried beneath the desert sands for over 1,000 years. It had once been a vital outpost along the Silk Road. The artifacts Haydeen recovered proved to be of immense historical value. The earliest documents dated back to the year 252 AD. The bamboo slips included both official and private correspondence between government officials and military personnel stationed in the Western Jin dynasty. Among the most valuable items were exquisite Han Dynasty silk textiles, vivid in color, richly embroidered with decorative characters, and a handwritten manuscript of the strategies of the warring states, Zhangguosu, from the Jin period. The handmade paper discovered at Lulan dated to a time 700 years earlier than the oldest known paper in Europe, a staggering leap in the timeline of human record-keeping. As news of Haydeen's discovery spread, explorers from around the globe flocked to the ruins of Lulan, the ancient city he once called the Pompeii beneath the sands. The enigmatic beauty of the Lulan Lady. In May 1934, a foreign expedition arrived at the ancient Lulan site, setting up camp along the banks of the calm river. Their goal was to find a lost burial ground. Soon, they unearthed a stunningly ornate tomb belonging to an ancient woman. The grave was adorned with intricate patterns characteristic of the western regions. Given the tomb's remarkable craftsmanship, it was clear that the woman buried there had held a significant status, despite Lulan being a relatively small kingdom in terms of population and territory. The expedition dubbed her the Princess of Lulan. Upon examination, her facial features and skeletal structure bore a striking resemblance to those of Caucasians. Oddly, her body was rather petite compared to what one might expect. Decades later, in 1980, Chinese archaeologists made another extraordinary discovery near Lop Nur, Xinjiang, the body of a woman preserved in astonishing condition. When the coffin was opened, everyone was stunned. Inside lay a woman with reddish-brown skin, long flowing black hair still soft to the touch, large eyes, deep eye sockets, a high nose bridge, and a pointed chin. She looked remarkably like a typical European. The press began calling her the beauty of Lulan. Yet, her exact ethnic origin remained a mystery. Years later, as DNA technology advanced, researchers conducted genetic tests on the beauty of Lulan. They discovered that she was not of purely Caucasian descent. Her maternal genes traced back to Eastern Eurasian populations. In other words, she was of mixed heritage, a blend of East and West. This finding was further supported by other ancient remains unearthed in Lulan, most of which dated back 3,000 to 4,000 years. Previously, historians believed that the earliest contact between China and the West began with the Han Dynasty envoy Zhang Qian's mission to the western regions. But the discovery of the Lulan beauty shattered that assumption. Her existence suggests that East-West cultural exchange may have started as early as 2000 BCE. Lulan's history may even trace back to the dawn of Chinese civilization some 5,000 years ago, and the kingdom we now know as Lulan might simply represent the final chapter in a far longer, richer saga. The mystery of Lulan's disappearance, while the Lulan beauty continues to captivate imaginations, perhaps the greatest enigma of all is the sudden disappearance of the ancient Lulan kingdom. Several theories have emerged over time. One of the most widely accepted is ecological collapse. This theory proposes that Lulan had established a vast city, spanning over 100,000 square meters, beside the Lop Nur Lake. During its golden age, large forests were cut down to build mysterious sun burials. These structures, shaped like radiant suns, were constructed using layers of round wooden logs arranged concentrically. 7 rings of upright wooden stakes, each more than 30 centimeters tall, encircled the grave, symbolizing the sun shining upon the earth. However, deforestation, combined with the shifting course of the Darim River, caused Lop Nur to retreat northward. Eventually, Lulan's water source dried up, and the desert sands swallowed the city whole. Another theory suggests that because Lulan lay at the heart of the Silk Road, it became a strategic prize. Constant wars over this coveted location may have devastated its civilization and led to its abrupt disappearance. A third hypothesis centers on epidemic disease. Some researchers believe Lulan may have suffered a catastrophic outbreak, possibly a form of fever or plague. The virulence of the illness could have either killed its population or forced survivors to flee, leaving behind a lifeless ghost city. Of course, these explanations address only the physical symptoms. A deeper view comes from spiritual practitioners who claim to see the past through the divine eye of destiny. One such individual revealed that during Lulan's peak, decadence, greed, and moral decay overtook the once virtuous land. As its people indulged in luxury and corruption, their spiritual foundations crumbled, much like the fall of Pompeii. In the end, Lulan was punished by the heavens. Its civilization vanished, its people lost to time, and the city was buried beneath the desert sands, forgotten for 1,000 years. The mystery of hundreds of 4,000-year-old mummies in China's desert. Ever since their discovery, the origins of hundreds of mummies, buried in wooden boats beneath the harsh sands of China's Xinjiang desert, have remained a gentle enigma that continues to puzzle scholars. Unearthed in the Darjeeling Basin during the 1990s, these ancient bodies and their woven garments have remained astonishingly intact despite the passing of 4 millennia. Preserved naturally by the desert's dry, warm air, many still wear the calm expressions of their final slumber, with delicate facial features and strands of sun-kissed hair, their Western appearance, woolen clothing, and the presence of cheese, wheat, and millet beside them whisper of a long-ago life. These quiet traces suggest they may have been herders from the wide steppes of West Asia, or farming folk who once journeyed from distant mountain ranges and desert oases in Central Asia, bringing with them stories now lost to time and wind. A deeper mystery beneath the sands, yet, in recent years, a team of researchers, comprising scientists from China, Europe, and the Americas, unraveled a quiet revelation. By sequencing the DNA of 13 of these ancient mummies for the first time, they uncovered a surprising truth: the mummies were not newcomers from distant lands, but rather, descendants of a deeply rooted local population. Their genetic heritage traces back to an ancient Ice Age Asian lineage that once thrived in isolation. These mummies have long captivated scientists and the public alike, shared Christina Wariner, Associate Professor of Anthropology at Harvard University and co-author of the study published in Nature on October 27. Our findings show they belong to a genetically isolated local community. Yet, they seemed remarkably open to new ideas and technologies from neighboring herders and farmers, all while nurturing a unique cultural identity found nowhere else. The desert's dry, scorching breath had kept their bodies intact for millennia, preserved in silence. The team examined the oldest mummies from the Darjeeling Basin, dating between 3,700 and 4,100 years ago, alongside DNA from 5 even older individuals unearthed in the Dzungarian Basin to the north, aged between 4,800 and 5,000 years. In an era when written records were few and fleeting, ancient DNA offered one of the clearest windows into the ebb and flow of human history. Ancient DNA can offer compelling evidence of how people moved through time, noted Vagheesh Narasimhan, assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin. The study found no genetic mixing between the Darjeeling Basin mummies and any contemporaneous populations. These individuals were direct descendants of an Ice Age hunter-gatherer group that once spanned great regions, before largely vanishing around 10,000 years ago. Today, echoes of their genes survive most prominently among indigenous peoples of Siberia and the Americas. Still, the research was confined to a single corner of the vast Darjeeling Basin. Scientists remain uncertain whether wider genetic sampling might tell a different story. Though the mummies were found along the desert's fringe, their burial, placed within wooden boats, covered in cattle hides, with paddles resting quietly at the prow, remains a tender, unsolved mystery. In truth, China has never been a land of mummification traditions. Yet, under certain rare and natural conditions, mummies have quietly formed, just as they have in distant corners of the world. Among them, the most famous is the Eismanazzi, preserved in frozen solitude for thousands of years. But in China, some mummies tell a far more complex story. Several of these ancient bodies date back as far as 4,000 years. And what makes them all the more mysterious is their appearance: fair skin, unfamiliar faces, so different from the generations of Chinese people who have long called these lands home. When archaeologists first began studying these remains, they were met not with clarity, but with wonder and confusion. The physical traits of the mummies, down to their bone structure, echoed people not of the East, but of Mesopotamia, of Europe, of Northwest Asia. Even of ancient India. Their presence in the desert's cradle, thousands of years ago, remains a question whispered through time, waiting for the sands to speak. National Geographic once produced a documentary exploring the quiet, ancient exchanges between East and West, told, as most stories are, through the eyes of the Western world. To the average person, the distance between East and West in ancient times may seem vast and unreachable. And yet, fragments of the Western world appear in old Chinese texts, though often veiled in vagueness, described only as strange lands beyond the mountains and seas. Similarly, the West painted its own hazy pictures of the East, shaped more by imagination than understanding. Long before Marco Polo ever set foot in Asia, Western stories were already steeped in fantastical images of the East. Even today, curious echoes of those misunderstandings sometimes remain, but the true connections between East and West in the ancient world are far more mysterious, and far more beautiful, than we often imagine. In the 1970s and 1980s, China uncovered a stunning secret buried deep in the sands of Xinjiang's Tarim Basin, a vast number of naturally preserved mummies. Their bodies had rested for thousands of years in perfect stillness, cocooned by the dry desert air. Yet what astonished researchers most wasn't only their faces, frozen in time, or their remarkably well-kept clothing, but the strange, exquisite objects they carried. Artifacts that whispered of journeys, of stories untold, of a world far more connected than history once dared to dream. In 1988, when an American scholar journeyed to China to study the ancient mummies, he found himself quietly startled. The faces of the mummies, so well preserved by time, bore a striking resemblance to his own, especially their pale skin. According to the historical records available at the time, no known trade routes or exchanges had linked East and West as far back as 3,000 years ago. In that distant era, the only conceivable bridge between the two worlds would have passed through the Tarim Basin in the far northwest, the very place where these fair-skinned mummies were unearthed. From this arose a gentle but haunting hypothesis: perhaps these people had settled here long ago. And yet, apart from their carefully wrapped remains, there is no trace of them. No written records, no names in old scrolls, no descendants living on today to tell their story. In 1978, Chinese archaeologist Wang Binghua led a team into the heart of the Tarim Basin. There, they unearthed mummies whose faces seemed foreign, strikingly different from the East Asian people long known to inhabit these lands. It would be easy to imagine they were ancient warriors from the western regions, or nomadic herders who had journeyed eastward with their flocks. And perhaps such guesses are not far from the truth. These people made their lives in the desert oases of the Tarim Basin. But what remains most puzzling are the strange and unique objects they brought with them. Artifacts that do not speak the language of any known culture, and whose meaning drifts, like sand, just beyond our reach. From the woven threads of a small mummy's skirt, new clues began to emerge. Clues that gently whispered of faraway lands and forgotten connections. The fabric, its structure and weaving technique, bore striking resemblance to diagonal twill from ancient Europe. Similar textiles had been unearthed in Germany, Austria, and even Scandinavia. This style of weaving was unique to Europe at the time. Even more telling, the fabric was made almost entirely from wool. Meanwhile, ancient China had not yet developed sheep herding techniques, and fabrics that were typically made from plant fibers or silk. Another quiet revelation lay beside these mysterious remains: bronze tools. To the Chinese, bronze often brings to mind ritual bells or three-legged cauldrons. But scholars believe bronze smelting technology originated in Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization in the West. It's long been suggested that China's Bronze Age was sparked by knowledge that flowed in from distant lands. Though still a subject of scholarly debate, archaeological findings suggest that bronze may have first entered Chinese territory from the west, through the very sands of Xinjiang. The oldest bronze artifacts found in China came not from its heartlands, but from the outer reaches of the Tarim Basin. Alongside the mummies lay bones, horse tack, saddles, and clothing tailored for horseback riding. Their trousers were not garments of ceremony, but practical inventions, designed for long hours in the saddle. And the horses themselves? Remarkably similar to the breeds that once roamed the steppe, symbols of the ancient cross-cultural tapestry of Eurasia. People in this region may have tamed wild horses as early as 5,500 years ago, far earlier than the arrival of horses in central China, believed to have occurred around 2,000 years ago, likely through Western influence. And yet, even in this remote desert, Chinese artifacts have also been uncovered. Some researchers now believe these mysterious people may have traded with Han Chinese through early systems of exchange, hints of a network that predated the famed Silk Road. What astonished historians most, however, was a mummy found in Russia's Hermitage Museum. Discovered in Siberia, over 1,000 kilometers away, it shared stunning similarities with the mummies of Xinjiang. Among the Siberian artifacts were identical textiles, woven with the same techniques. From the same wool, other parallels included horses, and symbolic two-wheeled chariots, featuring wide, tall wheels with numerous spokes. These were Western icons, and in ancient Chinese records, such chariots became part of the mysterious image of the distant West. So, where did these Tarim mummies truly come from? Archaeological evidence points in many directions, weaving from Europe, metallurgy from Mesopotamia, horses from the Eurasian borderlands, and jewelry fashioned from Indian Ocean shells, carried by what some believe to have been shamans. To trace their origins more clearly, scholars turn to DNA, but time is a cruel guardian. Though the mummies were preserved in nearly perfect conditions, thousands of years had damaged most of the genetic material. Still, after tireless effort, Professor Jean Li and his team at Fudan University were able to extract a small sample from a thigh muscle. What they found was astonishing: genetic signatures from Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Siberia, Tibet, Mongolia, India, and even East Asia. A swirling mix of ancestry, an ancient kaleidoscope of humanity. These people were not of one nation or one tribe. They were a tapestry, a living mosaic of cultures, skills, and stories, woven together by migration across the great Eurasian landmass. Professor Jean Li believes the Tarim Basin was more than a desert. It was a gateway, a central route through which peoples of the ancient world drifted eastward. In his words, it's not an exaggeration to say that this was a gathering place for lost civilizations. The Battle of Carrhae, 53 BC, the fall of Crassus and the preservation of the East, one of the greatest military disasters in Roman history, occurred far from home, in the deserts of Mesopotamia. It was a clash that not only shattered Roman ambitions in the East but also safeguarded the continuation of an ancient civilization. Parthia, a new Alexander, Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, was marching eastward, dreaming of eternal glory and conquest, perhaps to become a new Alexander the Great. He hoped to inscribe his name among the legends of empire. But not everyone in Rome welcomed this ambition. Once, after Hannibal's devastating invasion, Italy was thrown into years of chaos and civil war. That era seemed to have ended with the rise of three powerful men, the rulers of Rome's fractured world. Crassus was one of them. A former lieutenant under the brutal dictator Sulla, Crassus had enriched himself by seizing the lands of the defeated. He built his fortune in the ruins of civil war. The second was Pompey, Sulla's most capable general, who earned fame by crushing the pirates of the Mediterranean and toppling decadent kings in the East. And the third was Julius Caesar, rising leader of the populace, the faction once led by Sulla's sworn enemy, Marius. Together, they formed a fragile alliance known as the First Triumvirate. But their shared hunger for power could not be contained forever. Crassus and Pompey both sought to be elected as consuls, ignoring the will of the Senate. They cared little for anyone else, except their growing fear of Julius Caesar. To avoid plunging Rome into civil war, the three men met in secret. In truth, they carved the Roman Republic into three pieces, dividing its vast domains among themselves. Pompey took Spain, rich in silver mines and controlling trade routes to the mysterious lands beyond the Pillars of Hercules. Caesar claimed Gaul, where endless tribal wars gave him a stage to prove his military genius. And Crassus, perhaps the least experienced soldier of the three, took Syria. Each man hoped to rule his own realm in a way that would surpass the others, and eventually rise as Rome's sole master. Crassus was content with his share. Pompey's lands were strong but isolated, surrounded by water and Caesar's territories. There was little space for expansion, and Pompey's legions had nowhere to conquer. Caesar, for his part, was in Gaul, rich in opportunities for war, though the lands were held by so-called barbarians, with little wealth to plunder. But Syria opened a door to something greater. To the east of Syria lay the ancient region of Babylonia, the cradle of empires, nestled between mighty rivers. Beyond that was Persia, now ruled by the Parthians, and further still, the mystical empires of the Far East. Crassus had long remained quiet, content in his immense wealth and influence. But everything changed once he joined the triumvirate. According to the ancient writer Plutarch, Crassus was extraordinarily arrogant, burning with ambition, and dreaming of distant lands like Bactria, India, and the ends of the ocean. In other words, Crassus saw himself as a new Alexander, a greater Alexander. He dreamed of marching beyond India, of conquering the legendary kingdoms of the East, even of reaching China. And when he returned to Rome, crowned in glory, the entire world would kneel before him. His two rivals, Caesar and Pompey, would have no choice but to bow, but not all Romans shared his grand vision. Many were disturbed by the thought that a single wealthy man could use Rome's soldiers and resources to wage a personal war, especially against a distant nation that had never threatened them. One such critic was Aetius, a tribune of the people. Outraged, he rallied a crowd to stop Crassus as he was leaving the city. The streets grew tense. Pompey, ever the statesman, intervened to calm the people, and Crassus passed through the gates. But Aetius was not finished. He raced ahead and waited at the city's edge. As Crassus approached, Aetius lit incense, poured wine upon the earth, and called down a terrible curse. He invoked strange and ancient gods, casting dark omens upon Crassus's campaign. The skies did not rumble. The earth did not crack, but perhaps something listened. But Crassus was too busy dreaming of eastern gold and the glory that awaited him upon his return to Rome. He gave little thought to the strange and terrible gods or the Parthians who lay ahead. Crossing the Euphrates River, Crassus led his legions into Parthian territory. They marched along the river banks, confident in their strength. Now and then, Parthian horse archers appeared in the distance, but each time Roman cavalry approached, they vanished like ghosts. One evening, an old Arab approached the Roman camp, asking to speak with the general. Some of the soldiers who had served in Syria recognized him. They told Crassus that the man had once given useful information to Roman commanders. So, Crassus allowed him in. The Arab bowed deeply and said, "If you wish to fight, you must act quickly, before the Parthian king gathers his courage and assembles his full army." He claimed that King Oroda was fleeing eastward toward the steppes of the Saka nomads, and had sent a small force led by a noble named Surina to distract the Romans. This was a lie, but like all good lies, it held a thread of truth. Surina did not command the full Parthian army. He had only 10,000 cavalry, elite horsemen, yes, but outnumbered by Crassus's force of 40,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry. Among Surina's troops were 1,000 heavy cavalry, his personal guard, armored from head to toe like iron statues. Oroda, the Parthian king, had taken the main army north to invade Armenia. It seemed he wanted his powerful noble, Surina, both brilliant and ambitious, to deal with the Romans. If Crassus somehow won, he would still face the king's forces, weary and weakened. And if he lost, Oroda would have nothing to worry about. To make sure the Romans stepped into the trap, Oroda sent the Arab to feed Crassus false hope. The old man urged haste. "Strike Surina now," he said. "Destroy his small force before the king escapes into the endless grasslands." He even offered a plan, how to corner Surina's elusive cavalry, which always darted away before the Romans could strike. Crassus listened, and he believed. It was a lie, woven with just enough truth to be believed. Surina's force was smaller than Crassus's. He commanded 10,000 cavalry, including 1,000 heavily armed cataphracts, armored riders in his personal guard. Crassus, by contrast, had 40,000 infantry and 4,000 cavalry. The numbers favored Rome, but Surina was not the commander of Parthia's main army. King Oroda had taken that force north to invade Armenia. It seemed he wanted Surina, his most powerful vassal, and perhaps a future rival, to face the Romans alone. Even if Crassus won, he would emerge weakened, only to face the true might of Parthia later. To ensure the Romans took the bait, Oroda sent the Arab as a lure. The old man whispered to Crassus that his best chance was to strike quickly, destroy Surina first, then turn east to pursue the Parthian king before he vanished into the endless steppes. He told the Romans how Surina's light cavalry would always appear and vanish again, never staying still long enough for a direct attack. But, he said, there was a way to catch them. If they left the river and marched inland. Crassus believed him, so the Romans turned away from the Euphrates, abandoning the safety of its waters. They passed over low hills and entered a vast plain. At first, the road seemed easy, even pleasant. But it quickly became a nightmare. There was no shade, no water, no trees, no streams, no end in sight. Only sand. Endless, burning sand. The men grew weary. Their mouths dry, their feet heavy. The desert stretched on like a sea of dust, each wave of heat more hopeless than the last. There was no green, no shelter, no sound, only the wind and the crushing silence of their own doubts. And then, the Arab was gone. He left quietly, telling Crassus he would go ahead and cause confusion in the Parthian lines. He never returned. At last, the Roman army reached a small stream near a village called Cari. There, in the shimmering heat, they spotted Surina's force waiting in the distance. It looked even smaller than they had expected. What they didn't see, what lay hidden behind the dunes, was the rest of the Parthian army. Surina had concealed most of his men, keeping them out of sight and out of the sun. The heat reflecting off their armor would have given them away too soon. Then, suddenly, it rolled across the plain like the roar of an approaching storm, and from behind the sand dunes, the Parthian cavalry appeared, glittering like a wall of metal. They looked as if they had risen from the earth itself. The heavy cavalry, their armor flashing beneath the sun, charged forward with long spears aimed straight at the Roman lines, but the Romans held firm. They formed tight ranks, their shields locked together, their discipline unshaken. The Parthians veered off, galloping away as a new wave surged in behind them, light horse archers, firing arrows as they rode. The sky darkened, not with clouds, but with arrows. The Parthian archers fired in every direction, their horses moving in endless circles around the Roman formation. When Roman cavalry gave chase, the archers simply retreated and shot backward over their shoulders, striking with perfect aim even in flight. Crassus ordered his light infantry to break out and counterattack. They never got close. A hail of arrows forced them back, piercing shields, armor, and flesh. The Roman lines began to falter. The soldiers waited. Surely, the Parthians must run out of arrows, but they didn't. Behind the line of archers, Surina had prepared one final cruelty: 1,000 camels, each carrying full sacks of arrows. When one archer emptied his quiver, another stepped forward. The sky never cleared. The storm never ended, and the desert was silent, except for the sound of Roman shields shattering, and men dying where they stood. Crassus still believed the day could be turned. His son, Publius, young and brave, led a bold counterattack, 1,300 cavalry, 500 archers, and 8 cohorts of infantry. The Roman charge broke forward like a wave, and the Parthians seemed to falter. They turned. They fled. Publius gave the order to pursue, but it was a trap, too far from the main Roman line, surrounded by nothing but silence and sand. Publius and his men were swallowed whole. The Parthian heavy cavalry turned suddenly, like steel wolves in the desert, and charged with deadly precision. The Roman cavalry broke and fell back, only to find themselves ringed by a storm of arrows. There was no escape. Publius died fighting, his body pierced, broken. The Parthians cut off his head, mounted it on a spear, and rode to the Roman front lines, to show Crassus. They didn't speak, they didn't need to. As night fell, the Roman army collapsed inward, scattered in fear, in confusion. Crassus, now broken in spirit, tried to hold what remained together. But Surina was not finished. He sent envoys, Arabs under his command, with a message. Surina wished to speak. Crassus agreed. There was no other way. The path forward held only 2 doors: death or surrender. They met in the dark sands, but words turned bitter. The Parthians demanded more than Crassus could give. One Roman officer struck a Parthian soldier. Blades were drawn. Crassus was seized, struck down. The negotiations ended in blood. The survivors, those few who remained, were taken in chains, marched eastward, never to return. Some say they were settled in distant towns in Persia or even far off China. But Rome never saw them again, and so it ended, not in glory, not in triumph, but in silence, a silence broken only by the whispering wind through the desert, across the ruins of broken shields, fallen standards, and the bones of legions lost to time. Carry was not just a defeat, it was the end of an age.